Well, good morning, John. It's good to see you on this sunny Thursday morning. John, we've had some economic data out in Australia over the last couple of days, a little soft in terms of retail sales. Do you think that the Australian economy is progressing okay? It seems to be in a little bit of a contradiction because share markets all over the world are hitting new highs.
Well, we've always said this, Paul, that share markets are forward-looking and they don't reflect the past, they reflect what's likely or possibly going to happen in the future, and that's what the market is. This information we've got from the ABS regarding retail sales suggests the interest rate cut, the cash rate adjustment by the central banks, more likely than not. As we know, interest rates and risk-free rate of return are very important for valuing stocks, so there's your leg up. If the market perceives that there's earnings growth, then it's that's the magnification effect on the stock market. But to your point, markets are running strongly at present. I think there's also a lot of speculation regarding what's going to happen in the US, so I know we'll talk about that shortly.
John, overnight the S&P 500, NASDAQ hit new all-time highs. In Australia, we've got the Australian dollar knocking on the door of 66 cents. Are inflationary pressures so diminished that we really have the opportunity for central banks to lower interest rates substantially?
Well, inflation is the future. It's not the current. The Trump administration is obviously keen to tell everyone that there is no inflation after tariffs were introduced, but we haven't had the tariffs really introduced as yet. Yes, there has been some adjustments, but what we know happened in the March quarter, there was massive importing by importers in America to stock up prior to an adjustment of import prices. So we're still running through that cycle. And we've also got the big adjustments coming sometime in July. We're told by the Trump administration, July 9th is the trigger date. So, if inflation's benign, there was a little bit of a stir up, which I think was done away with quickly with the Iranian war. We saw oil spike and gasoline prices spike in America, but they were quickly rectified. So, again, we don't want to look back too much and suggest looking back is going to tell us where inflation's going. I think the risk is there is a bit of a tip up in inflation, and that's what the Federal Reserve is saying in America.
So there are two quite interesting dynamics happening overseas at the moment. On the one hand, Congress is trying to pass President Trump's big, beautiful bill. And on the other hand, Sir Keir Starmer in the UK has introduced spending cuts, which apparently left his Chancellor in tears on the floor of the Parliament. Is there something that you can comment on about governments battling with these huge government debt levels and how they get out from under this? And does it apply to Australia?
Look, it applies to the Western world, and a little bit less so to Australia, although we managed to completely mismanage our fiscal policy. But if you go back 25 years towards the end of the last century, there was a lot of demographic studies undertaken for the Western world and identified ageing population as a major issue, and obviously social security payments, aged care payments, healthcare payments across the Western world were going to go up. And the suggestion was by statisticians and forecasters that all Western governments had to get their budgets in order. Now, to our credit, in 2008, Australia was pretty well debt-free. We'd undertaken that process through the Howard Costello government, but they did sell off assets. The rest of the world just didn't do it. And that led us into the GFC, and as you know what happened then, all bets were off, and in 2009, the Western world went on in a major fiscal bailout of the financial system. So whatever the intentions of the Western world were, it was throttled by poor fiscal and financial management going into and coming out of the GFC. And that's carried on for virtually 10 years. And UK was probably one of the worst in terms of managing its balance sheet. It obviously had its issue with breaking out of the Eurozone, the Euro market, the Euro. That didn't help its budget situation either, as it decoupled. The only country, or some of the few countries, which seem to have done reasonably well at adjusting their fiscal position and their debt, a country like Germany, which is now recording astronomical growth in its stock market, not astronomical growth in its economy. But that takes us back to America. America's got its big budget. I've listened to the arguments there. They are cutting back on Medicaid, whatever they call it. But the administration argues that there's a lot of wastage. And then you come back to Australia and maybe we've got a similar issue with wastage through the NDIS. It's a very difficult discussion. I hear the dogs are barking, Paul, but they're trying. I don't know what he's trying to say, but maybe he's trying to say he doesn't like the NDIS.
Just bringing it back to Australia, John, we seem to be in a little bit of a pincer, and let me explain. Trump went to NATO and told them that they had to spend 5% on defence spending. Australia is going to be part of that same discussion. And at the same time, we've got the NDIS expenditure rising above defence spending, in fact, in Australia, which is stuck at about 2%. And at the same time, Trump is using tariffs as a lever to try and influence countries to do more of that defence spending. Are we stuck in a bit of a bind? How do you see this getting resolved?
Well, it's almost becoming dangerous to engage with America in defence. The numbers are clear, and I think we should just clarify it. You know, if a country spends 5% of GDP on defence, and let's talk about Australia, our budget is 27% of GDP. So if we spent 5% of GDP on defence, it would take almost 20% of our budget outlays. That's ridiculous. I think we're running around 7 or 8 at present. The budget couldn't handle it. And that's concurrent with this AUKUS agreement, which is a $400 billion investment over the next 20 or 30 years, which is, I think Australia's got to reset, rethink about what its future is in defence. You don't want to decouple from America, but I think you've got to make the assumption that America, if push came to shove, a future administration would want to be more friendly with Australia than anyone else in Asia. So I just think that the Australian government's just got to pull up stumps here and just back off and just say, look, we'll just see this out. And if this type of rhetoric lasts 4 years, okay, it'll end. If it lasts 8 years, it'll end. We've made serious commitments on AUKUS, which is, capital being outlaid, which could have been better spent somewhere else in the Australian economy. We can talk healthcare, education, you can talk infrastructure, you can talk house building. I mean, there's so many better areas. You can talk energy, for one, and we've had that discussion before, Paul. Australia's got to stand back here and stand up. And this morning there's been a cable, which I guess will become news, that the American pharmaceutical companies are now complaining again about our pharmaceutical scheme and think they're being ripped off by the Australian government. Well, frankly, if the American corporate sector and the administration wants to dictate to Australia how it runs its country, I think, look, it's nice knowing you, we're friends, but let's just stop there and carry on. Australia is an Asian country. We have, as I keep on saying, 3 billion people to our north who are keen to trade with us. That's a much bigger market than America and a much friendlier market, frankly.
Interesting point, John. And while we're seeing weakness in the US and Europe, although there's some good recovery in Germany, China's economic data has actually been slightly better than expected. I know this morning we had a discussion about commodity prices and particularly precious metals, which have been on a tear. Do you think that commodities and exports to China are once again going to prove us the lucky country?
Well, we better hope for it, because there's not much else happening in terms of Australia's exports. It's all commodity and energy driven. It's not a sensible policy in terms of being fought out in terms of business and government getting together about what we're trying to achieve here. But I think we will slide through in the next few years. Australia internally, as we just said in the first question, is suffering, greatly in terms of real wage decline and retail sales are not growing. But I think China is very nimble, more nimble than America suggests. And America can embargo China, but America is only 12% of the direct trade out of China. Probably indirect trade through Vietnam. I know there's a Vietnam deal being suggested this morning. I'm not quite sure. I think the headlines are greater than the reality, but that's just what happens with Trump. China will trade with the rest of the world and openly if the rest of the world wants to trade with China. And Australia's biggest trading partner is China, and they're 35% of our exports. America's like 5% of our exports. I mean, really? Are we really that desperate, in terms of trading with America? And particularly when we get this pharmaceutical issue this morning where they want to increase substantially their prices of imported pharmaceuticals to Australia. Really? That's not in our interest.
John, here's a question without notice. I noted in today's Australian Financial Review, there's an article about the CEO of Glencore, Gary Nagle, saying that refineries and smelters in Australia are no longer economically viable. So we're missing out on the value add component of these commodity exports. And China is busy, funding these kind of smelters, refineries in places like Indonesia. Are we missing out on a really good opportunity to value add? And, this is where perhaps government leadership is required.
Well, I think it's gone past the point of no return, because it really is an issue about energy costs. And that's how I read the announcement for Glencore, that they just can't make it work. And I think they quoted something like a $30 million a month loss out of the smelters in Mount Isa. I mean, we can obviously move our smelters to America and get over the tariff issue if that's important. But this is serious now, and the energy policy of Australia has taken us down and landed us in a position where a lot of our businesses are becoming unsustainable. And export is an open market. You've got to meet the market price of exports, and no amount of government assistance will help you. So it's a serious problem, and I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do until we've got a think tank, I think, early August, where the government's having a productivity roundtable. I won't be invited, never am. But honestly, it's going to be interesting to see what they talk about, because they're making a botch up of the superannuation tax. There's a lot better suggestions now coming, even from the Greens, God forbid. They're coming out and saying, why are we taxing unrealised gains? There must be better ways. Everyone's saying, why isn't this indexed? Most people are saying, why are we taxing unrealised gains? I mean, if the government wants to have a round table, it better start inviting sensible people who have a vision for Australia, because without a vision, you're just going to be talking.
And it's probably worthwhile mentioning that for historic reasons that we finally arrived at the 12% superannuation contribution after, 25 years of that being originally the target was 15%, but then it was lowered to 12%. So we're finally there. I guess we'll have to leave that discussion for another time, and the contradictions of tax policy on superannuation. Too much to deal with in the last minute or two.
Oh, Paul, don't get me started. We've got $4.25 trillion in super. We're going to pile more into there. We can't invest it in Australia. We're desperate to invest in America. America is desperate to tax our money. I mean, it's a crazy situation, and I look forward to this round table. I won't be invited, as I said. I look forward to see what these experts and these intelligentsia of Australia come up with in terms of a vision for Australia and the capital we can put.
We'll have to leave it there, John. Thank you so much. A lot to think about, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.